At 3:17 in the morning, in a signal box somewhere in northern England, a man named Harold wrote a single sentence in his logbook. Then he stopped writing forever. This is one of 4 true stories told by people who work where the rest of the world isn't allowed to follow. There is a question that has haunted me for some time now. A small, quiet question. The kind that arrives at 4 in the morning and refuses to leave. What happens to the mind when it is the only mind awake? Tonight we will hear from 4 people who lived inside that question. They worked in 4 different places, in 4 different decades, on 4 different continents. They had nothing in common, except for one detail. We will come to that. Before the world was wired together, before satellites watched the coastlines and computers managed the trains, there were people who did this work alone. A man in a glass tower watching for smoke in a forest the size of a small country. A woman in a stone room above the sea, trimming a wick that could not be allowed to go out. A signalman in a wooden box beside the tracks, pulling brass levers in a particular order, all night, every night, so that trains in the dark would not meet each other. These professions still exist, in small numbers, but they are vanishing. The signal boxes are being demolished. The lighthouses are unmanned. The fire towers are decommissioned, one by one, every summer. And as they disappear, so do the stories. Tonight, before they're gone, I want to tell you 4 of them. Carefully, with the dignity they deserve, because the people who lived these stories were not unreliable narrators. They were not superstitious. They were not, as far as anyone could tell, they were simply the only ones there. Our first story belongs to a man named Harold. The year is 1978. The place, a Victorian signal box on a quiet branch line in the north of England. I won't name the line, because the box no longer stands, and the family asked, many years later, that it not be named. Harold was 61 years old. He had worked the same night shift, on the same stretch of track, for 34 years. If you have never been inside a signal box, let me try to describe one to you. It is a small wooden room, raised slightly above the tracks, with tall windows on 3 sides. Inside, there is a row of brass levers, sometimes 10, sometimes 30, each one controlling a signal or a set of points further down the line. There is a desk, a kettle, a logbook, an oil lamp, later converted to a single electric bulb, a chair. That is all. The signalman's job is simple to describe and impossible to truly understand unless you have done it. You wait. You listen for the bells that announce a train's approach from the next box down the line. You pull the correct levers in the correct order. You write the time in the logbook. You wait again. For 12 hours. Alone. The nearest other human being, on Harold's line, was the signalman in the next box 4 miles away. They communicated by a system of coded bell rings. They never saw each other. Charles Dickens wrote a ghost story about a signalman in 1866. It is called, simply, The Signalman. In it, a railway signalman is haunted by a figure that appears beside the tracks before every disaster. I find it interesting, and I want you to sit with this for a moment, that the profession of signalman has been considered haunted in English literature for over 150 years. Why this job specifically? I think the answer is in the architecture. The signal box was designed for one body, one mind, one pair of eyes watching the dark for something that, statistically, almost never comes. The mind, given that much silence, begins to fill it. Our second story takes place in Montana, in the summer of 1991. Her name has been kept private at her family's request, so I will call her Jay. She was 26 years old, working her 3rd season as a fire lookout for the United States Forest Service. Her tower was a glass room, 14 feet by 14 feet, perched on a wooden frame 90 feet above a pine ridge. She lived there, alone, for 14-day rotations. She had a radio, a bed, a small stove, a pair of binoculars, and a device called an Osborne Firefinder, which is essentially a map on a turntable, used to triangulate the location of any smoke she might see. On day 9 of her rotation, she heard footsteps on the metal stairs leading up to her platform. She wrote about it later, in a journal that was eventually published, in part, in a forestry oral history collection. She was very precise in her writing. She noted that the footsteps were heavy, measured, that they paused, as a tired person's footsteps pause, on the small landing halfway up. She called down on the radio. There was no response. She waited at the top of the stairs with a flashlight for 19 minutes. No one came up. When she finally descended the stairs herself, in the gray light just before dawn, she found nothing. No prints, no disturbance. The forest below the tower was, as it had been for 9 days, entirely empty of human beings for at least 12 miles in any direction. She finished her rotation. She came back the next summer, and the summer after that. When asked, decades later, what she thought she had heard, she gave an answer I find difficult to forget. She said, "I think the forest after a while starts to listen back. And sometimes when it listens, you can hear it listening." Our third story is shorter and more modern, and I want to be honest with you about its provenance. It comes not from an oral history archive, but from a forum testimony, a story shared online by a man who claimed to have worked as a night auditor at a roadside motel in rural Nevada in the early 2000s. I cannot verify it. I include it because it shares a detail with the other 3. And that detail, I believe, is the point of this video. He worked the 11 to 7 shift. The motel had 42 rooms and, on most weeknights, fewer than 10 guests. His job was to monitor the front desk, run the nightly audit on the computer system, and occasionally hand a key card to a trucker passing through. He noticed, after several months, that one particular key card was being used to enter room 12 every night at exactly 2:47 in the morning. There was no guest registered in room 12. The card had not been issued to anyone. According to the system, it had never been issued at all. He watched the hallway camera one night, at the exact time. The keycard log registered an entry. Room 12's door opened, closed. The hallway, on camera, was empty. He quit 2 weeks later. The motel, he wrote, is still operating. He will not say which one. Our final story is the oldest, and the most famous, and the one I want you to remember when this video ends. In December of 1900, 3 men disappeared from a lighthouse on a rock called Eilean Moor, in the Flannan Isles, off the western coast of Scotland. Their names were James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald Mocker. I want you to remember those names. They were real men. They had wives. They had children. They left in late autumn to begin their rotation, and they were never seen again. When the relief ship arrived on the 26th of December, it found the lighthouse empty. The door was closed. The beds were unmade. A meal sat on the table, half-eaten. One of the men's oilskin coats, the heavy weatherproof gear they wore to work outside in storms, was still hanging on its peg. 2 of the 3 men were gone. The third, MacArthur, had gone outside without his coat in December on a rock in the North Atlantic. The logbook was the strangest thing. In the days leading up to the disappearance, the entries grew increasingly unusual. I want to be careful here, because some of the most famous quotes from this logbook, including the often repeated line, "Storm still raging," Ducat irritable, MacArthur crying are believed by modern historians to be later folkloric embellishments, possibly invented for a poem written in 1912. So I will not repeat those quotes as fact. What we know for certain, from the genuine surviving records, is this. In the final days, the entries became shorter, more clipped. The handwriting changed. The last verified entry simply noted the weather and the time. And then, 3 theories emerged. The first, a freak wave swept all 3 men off the cliff while they were repairing equipment. This is the official explanation. It is probably correct. The second, one of them went mad in the isolation and harmed the others. The third theory has no name and no shape, and I will not give it one tonight. I will only tell you this. When investigators later interviewed lighthouse keepers from other stations, keepers who had served long rotations alone or in pairs on remote rocks like Ely and Moray, many of them, when asked privately, described having seen something on their stations, at some point, that they could not explain. They described a figure, always at the edge of vision, always still, always watching. This is the detail I promised you at the beginning. The signalmen in 1978, the fire lookout in 1991, the night auditor in 2003, the lighthouse keepers across a century of recorded testimony. All of them, eventually, describe the same thing, a figure they could not see clearly, at the edge of vision, standing still. I do not know what this is. I have read the psychiatric literature on sensory deprivation hallucinations. I have read the research on shift work sleep disorder, and on the documented phenomenon called the third man factor, the well-attested experience of mountaineers and polar explorers sensing an unseen companion beside them in extremity. These explanations are, I think, partially true. They are not, I think, completely true. There is something that happens to the human mind when it is the only mind in a place for a very long time. Whether what it perceives, in those hours, is conjured from within, or whether it is something that was always there, and simply waiting for the noise of the world to quiet enough that it could be noticed, I cannot say. I am not sure anyone can. Let me return for a moment to Harold, the man in the signal box in the north of England, in 1978. I told you, at the beginning, that he wrote a single sentence in his logbook at 3:17 in the morning, and then stopped writing forever. I owe you the sentence. It read, "He is standing at the end of the platform again. He hasn't moved in 2 hours." The next signalman, arriving for the morning shift at 6, found the box empty. The door was unlocked. Harold's kettle was still warm. His coat was on its peg. He was found, eventually, 2 miles down the track, sitting on a bench at a disused platform, unhurt, confused, unable or unwilling to say what had happened. He retired the following week. He lived another 19 years. He never returned to the signal box, and he never spoke about that night again, not even to his wife. The signal box was demolished in 1994 when the line was automated. These professions are mostly gone now. The signal boxes have been replaced by computer screens in a control room 200 miles away. The lighthouses are run by sensors and solar panels. The fire towers, one by one every summer, are coming down. We tell ourselves this is progress, and in many ways, it is. The work was hard. The pay was poor. The isolation took a measurable toll on the people who did it. But I think we are losing something else too, something we don't have a good word for. We are losing the people who kept watch in the places the rest of us were not willing to go. We are losing the witnesses, and whatever it is they were witnessing, whether it lived in their minds, or in the dark beyond the lamplight, or in some narrow space between the two, it is not, I think, going anywhere. It is simply being left unobserved. Somewhere tonight, a kettle is boiling in a small room with a single light. Someone is checking the logbook, and somewhere, just at the edge of the lamplight, something is checking back. Sleep well.